I'm Helen Marie. Welcome to episode 4 of my new podcast, I Don't Think We Talk Enough About. Today, I am talking with the wonderful Joshua Fletcher, also known as Anxiety Josh on social media. Josh is a psychotherapist and author who specialises in anxiety. His brilliant recent book titled And How Does That Make You Feel offers a glimpse behind the therapy room door and into the mind of a therapist, aiming to demystify what is often an unknown profession. The book explores what it's like to be an anxiety therapist, as well as the beauty of therapy and the unspoken aspects of the therapist and the therapy room. He's based in Manchester in the UK, and his practice is still very much open today. Josh is also the author of 2 other books aimed at self-help around anxiety, Untangle Your Anxiety and Anxiety, Panicking About Panic. What I love about this episode is the way Josh brings his personal story of anxiety to the conversation in such a heartfelt and incredibly helpful way. He has just such a drive and warmth, and his desire to help others is very much alive in the room. He shows us all that there's hope to live freer of anxiety. I think you'll love this conversation, and it's one I'm very excited to share with you all today.
Is that just like a good feeling?
Left hand as well.
So, Josh, welcome to the I Don't Think We Talk Enough About podcast. It's lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
I followed you for a while on Instagram, but we've not actually ever met in real life. But your platform's great. It's absolutely great. And for people listening, you're on Instagram as Anxiety Josh.
Yeah.
So there's no surprise that today is all about anxiety.
Yeah,
Right.
looking forward to hearing what people have asked, particularly from your community.
Yeah, no, of course. And this, I was saying before we started recording that it's been a bit different the way I'm doing this podcast today, because I normally have a section at the end of the podcast with questions from my audience. And I love it because I get their real questions coming in and what they want to know. So normally sort of three questions from them and a sort of 10-minute segment at the end. But when I put out on my community on stories the other day about anxiety, I was absolutely inundated with questions. And I thought, I think we need to do this differently. I think we need to let my community guide this podcast. And I mean, you work with anxiety a lot. And I know from having read your latest book, And How Does That Make You Feel, you're very honest about your own journey with anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. I think someone as a male psychotherapist whose passion is psychotherapy, therapy, getting people to talk, and also the world of anxiety and anxiety disorders, which I think is really important to get the right psychoeducation out there. I used to be a teacher and I miss it. It was good, but I wanted to combine teaching and the love for psychology. So I studied to be a psychotherapist, and that's what I do. It's what I've done in the book, and it's what I do every day in my practice or when I'm prancing around on social media.
No, it's fantastic. And as I was reading it, the book, Josh, it's very raw, but it's also very funny. I don't really know how you combine the two. I was at stages laughing out loud, and then in stages tears streaming, and you hold both emotions so beautifully in the book. And I wanted to acknowledge here that you've had a journey, and I wanted to hold space for that, to hold that awareness that to go in to train as a psychotherapist, this always makes me, I don't know why it shocks me so much, that we've all got a backstory, haven't we?
Yeah, definitely. I sometimes get asked, how do you, as someone who struggled a lot with anxiety, and I've struggled a lot in the past. I've had a panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, agoraphobia, just playing anxiety bingo, and I just need one more, and I've won. I know what it's like, and it does. I feel like I get asked, how can you speak about anxiety all day? And I was like, because I'm in a good place now, and I want people who struggle with anxiety to realize, you can get to a good place and have that hope and know you probably might have had anxiety for years. It might be chronic. It might be hindering your life right now, but no matter where you are, no matter how your anxiety presents, I want to show people that you can get to a better place. It is possible. And doing it the right way as well. The ones where you're learning about the brain, how anxiety works, what a threat response is, what you're doing to maintain the cycle. And, I don't mean that in an accusatory way, but when I was very unwell with anxiety for a long time, a lot of it was what I was doing, not intentionally, but learning about what I was doing that was keeping it there. Then going to therapy and learning more about myself and how I ended up here. And yeah, like I said, you can get to a good place.
Yeah, I think that's so lovely to hear and so encouraging, because a lot of the questions that came through were from people really struggling with will I ever get over this? Will I ever be able to live without anxiety? And you coming from that perspective of that experience, your level of empathy and compassion for people with anxiety is huge, isn't it? Because you know that they can come through with the right tools. And I love the way you talked about really understanding the brain. And I think that's where we've really started to shift, isn't it, in recent years with therapy. We're really moving along to the neuroscience combined with the therapy to really give meaning. And I'm finding, I'm sure you are, with my clients, that they want to know more. They want to understand what's actually happening in their body.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I used to struggle. My first ever anxious episode, when I had a nervous breakdown, for the want of a better term, in my young 20s, was when I was at work and going through a very stressful time. And I remember it's my first foray into anxiety disorder territory. I was making a cup of tea at work, and I dropped the teaspoon and made a slight clanging noise. And I looked up and I experienced dissociation for the first time, a symptom called derealization and depersonalization, where I didn't feel like I was in the room. I didn't feel like I was in my body. People's faces looked like clay. I just thought, you've finally done it, Josh. You've broken your mind. And I remember that was the moment that it changed, and I went home and didn't leave the house for a long time. And I'm quite an extroverted person as well, so it was very difficult for me because it all contrasted with being quite a confident person to feeling utter terror. I rang the ambulance a few times because I was having what I now know as panic attacks, but I had no idea. I thought a panic attack was what you see on TV. But then slowly but surely, I started to learn about it properly, what was happening, and not fearing it anymore. It's interesting, like a lot of people ask, like, how do you overcome or get past anxiety? I think the question's wrong. I was asking that all the time. I like to use the analogy of sitting in a busy restaurant. Some of the best restaurants I've been to have been loud and busy. And I use this analogy where, well, how do I turn off the noise in the restaurant? Now, when I was struggling really bad with anxiety, I go in the restaurant and worry because I couldn't turn down the noise, the clanging of plates, the chatter, the lounge music, whatever, people eating, cutlery. But have you noticed that when you go to a restaurant, you go out for something to eat with a loved one or a friend, your brain, if it's engaged, will actually shut all of that out, and you'll start just focusing on what your friend's saying. You're engaged in the conversation. Suddenly everything doesn't matter that the noise is there. And that's the kind of way I like to frame it. I was trying to make the restaurant quiet, which is impossible. But what I learned was that I can go into the restaurant and have a lovely time regardless of all the noise, because my brain can choose that it's not important with practice. And that's what I do now. I think most people with anxiety try to avoid it, which inadvertently teaches the brain that it's important. And so they go around all day, every day with a very loud, important message from the anxious brain saying you mustn't be anxious. But I live a very happy, content life now. Everyone gets anxiety. I do sometimes, but it doesn't bother me as much. Because it doesn't bother me, it happens less.
Yeah. I love the way you explained that about the the noise in the restaurant and the wanting to turn it down. And then when you're not struggling with anxiety and you're engaged with the people you're with, you don't even notice the noise. It's not there.
No, you don't even notice it. You
No,
wouldn't
you're
even.
so right.
Yeah, and it's the volume's still the same.
Yeah, of course it is.
But your focus is different. And I remember when I was really anxious, I was very hyper aware of my surroundings and myself and my symptoms, heart palpitations, fear, muscle tension, things like that. I love music gigs, and I go to a music gig and I couldn't concentrate on the band because I was in threat mode. And we'll talk about that later on if you like. But
definitely.
just in threat mode, and my attention was, in immediate threat. People around me, very hypersensitive to movement, where are the exits just in case I freak out. Now it's nice. I can just enjoy a gig. But a lot of anxiety, particularly if you're in anxiety disorder territory, which is 1 in 5 of us, it's when we go very inwards. The hyper-awareness of our feelings, our self, our thoughts, our intrusive thoughts, and it all feels very urgent and always has our attention. And that's the kind of anxiety that I kind of help people with.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And your journey too. I could sit and listen all day. I forgot that I had to ask questions. There's a couple of things you've said that I'd like to come back to because they were questions from the audience too. One was around the panic attacks and the anxiety attacks. I also, sadly, have experience of panic attacks. My journey.
They're fun, aren't they?
Yeah, ambulance calling, yeah, all of that. I know, and it's and I've not shared that before. So that is a little bit of self-disclosure for me, but they are terrifying. And when someone called the ambulance for me, the paramedic mentioned that it's one of their most popular call-outs is for a panic attack because people do think they're dying.
Yeah, the experience is terrifying. It's a panic attack when, it's a 3-part Woolworths pick and mix. The first one you've got is scary what-if thoughts. And it usually revolves around, what if I collapse? What if I'm going crazy? What if I die? What if I have a heart attack? What if I humiliate myself? So they're the what-if thoughts.
Yeah.
The second part of the Woolworths pick and mix is your strawberry laces or licorice, if you're that way inclined, is the physical symptoms, including dissociation. So a lot of people having panic attacks suddenly don't feel here. And they have this racing heart, air hunger, you can't quite catch a full breath.
Yeah.
I used to just bloat randomly, feel dizzy, lightheaded, muscle tension, chest tightness.
Yeah.
You might sweat, you might feel the need to go to the toilet. That's only the second part of the Woolworths pick and mix. And the third one's feelings. So some people freeze and dissociate. Most common feeling with panic attacks is terror. Doom is a one. I just feel like this doom feeling, and it's even scarier when you're in a situation that isn't dangerous. It feels more scary because you're like, I'm in Asda trying to get bread. Why do I feel like there's a gun to my head?
I know.
Yeah. And each person's panic attack is different, and I say, well, let's formulate it and let's guess it and make it more predictable so we fear them less.
I love that, and I love the way I love your pick a mix analogy. And it is, people experience them differently, but I noticed even as I spoke about it, and obviously I've done a lot of work on it, I could feel that memory in my body come back, and it's the fear that comes in, and you think, is it going to happen again? And it's I was mentally talking myself down and making my body feel safer as you were chatting because I could feel it come in. I have the skills to do that, but I'm aware that the general population don't, which is why it's so frightening for them.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk to you just before we move on about the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack, because there is a difference.
Yeah, I mean, anxiety attack's subjective. There's no official medical definition of an anxiety attack. Some people say, I had an anxiety attack over something very mild. Whereas, I didn't get tickets for Glastonbury and I had an anxiety attack.
Yeah.
Or some people can describe it as like a prolonged period of high anxiety and worry, particularly if it's stress-induced.
Yeah.
Panic attacks are very acute and sudden and intense, but don't last that long. If you fear panic attacks, then you get on the roller coaster like I did for months, because I didn't know what was happening to me. Yeah, I think panic attacks are quite specific, and anxiety attacks are usually subjective to each individual.
Okay.
I'm not going to dismiss someone's experience if they've had an anxiety attack. I hear that quite a lot, but actually medically, there's nothing that isn't recognised as a term.
No, I know, but we talk about it a lot, don't we? People get into that spiral of anxiety, don't they? And actually, a lot of people ask the question. Actually, I'm going to go back because I feel like I've gone forward too much, and I know that it would be really nice I've got a much better word than that. I think it's really important that we actually define what is anxiety.
Ooh, what is anxiety? It's your brain's threat response. It's the amygdala in your brain, a cashew-shaped part of your brain, somewhere knocking about here, I think. It's the oldest, fastest, dumbest part of you that has been primarily responsible for humans hitting the top of the food chain. Because, if you look at humans, we're not, compared to other large mammals, we're not very good at fighting or, I'll take on a bear, a few Stellas. But in general, we're not very good at fighting or running. And so what we do have is a threat response, which is so advantageous for human evolution and for us for where we are now. The threat response is to make you doubt. Now, if you are anxious, you'll be very familiar with doubt. It's often frowned upon or seen as weakness and things like that, which makes me laugh because the doubt response is magnificent. It's made us get to where we are now. My great auntie and uncle walking across the Serengeti, one of them says to the other, I feel a bit anxious, like something bad's going to happen. The doubt response kicks in. Maybe it's my uncle. My auntie says, oh, you're being an overthinker again. Stop worrying. Then my uncle says, no, I really think we might be in danger. Just a doubt response kicking in. And so as a result of that, my uncle looks up, exactly like a meerkat. We stole this from the meerkat, and scans the horizon. And lo and behold, because he was worried and started to focus on potential threats, he sees a herd of lions a mile away that they'd have just walked into if he wasn't worried. Now it's advantage humans because you can walk around the lions, you can wait until they fall asleep, or, you can have a Lion King themed barbecue later on. So it's up to you. And all because of that doubt response. It is never evolved, but it's really annoying if you're sat at the computer, in the office, out with your mates, on public transport, because it makes you doubt your safety and you try to make sense of that doubt. And that's the threat response. What a threat is subjective to the individual. So some people, particularly with panic attacks, might see panic attacks themselves as threat. Mm-hmm. Some people may care what people think. So judgment, rejection as threat, particularly if you've had a rough upbringing or been in an abusive relationship, your amygdala will remember those things. Phobias are a threat. I don't like spiders, and you won't see me picking one up anytime soon.
Oh, join the club.
Yeah, not a chance. Yeah.
No, and even with all of my training and the mind-body connection, I will try so hard. Still, just can't go there.
Well, we do, if we needed to for our own life, we probably would. But I'm quite happy to go to my deathbed not doing that.
Not sure. Yeah. That one I just can't. I really struggle.
Yeah, it's just whatever the threat is. There'll be people listening now with generalized anxiety disorder where sometimes we're anxious first, and then the brain tries to give us reasons as to why we're anxious. It goes, well, why are you so anxious? So it'll just give you a plethora of what ifs. What if it's that? What if it's that? What if that person hates you? What if you've not done that in time? What if you disappoint that person? What if you've not locked the front door? And it's just going, what if, what if, what if? It's a very basic response, but incredibly powerful. And it's really nice to frame it and see it as something that is not really part of your entire thinking brain it's something you've got to learn to get along with.
I love that. Can you just describe a little bit about generalized anxiety disorder?
Yeah, it's when chicken or the egg scenario, sometimes something we worry about triggers our anxiety, or sometimes we're just anxious for no reason, and then the brain tries to present worries. The roots of GAD, generalized anxiety, is different for each person.
Yes, I know that I'm interrupting you there, but I know that was a question that was just literally pinging on my DMs, which was, what causes it? What causes it? And I know you can't just give one answer, but I just wondered whether you'd share from your experience just some causes of anxiety.
Yeah, so my anxiety, you're more susceptible to anxiety due to genetics. I like to use the exhausted analogy of the stress jug. It's not original, but I do like it in the sense that we all have a stress jug or receptacle of your choice. And the size of that stress jug is dependent on things like genetics. For me, my mum and dad were quite anxious people, so I was screwed immediately. I could be very mindful of what goes in my stress jug.
Yes.
And I believe during a period of your life when stress builds up and builds up and builds up, your threat response doesn't understand all this subjective modern stress, doesn't understand deadlines or social commitments or various parts of identity building. It just understands you're stressed, so tries to step in by activating the threat response, which releases adrenaline and cortisol. And you're anxious and you've got adrenaline and cortisol on board when you have the Woolworths pick and mix like we mentioned before.
Yeah.
And there's so many symptoms.
Yes.
People with GAD will have scary what-if thoughts, but they'll also have I should thoughts. And it manifests a lot as productivity anxiety. So they feel guilty for stopping. They have to-do lists constantly and then feel guilty for not doing them. They find it difficult to stop because that threat response is saying, do something, even though it's time to rest. It's different for each individual with GAD. You never know. It could be related to self-esteem. Maybe you don't feel great about yourself and it manifests as anxiety. It's in this country in particular, the diagnosis of GAD is often thrown around quite hastily in my experience.
Agreed.
Yeah, you go to your doctor. I was diagnosed with GAD, and what I actually had was panic disorder and OCD, which was really interesting. But yeah, GAD's usually the one where you're anxious, you go to the doctor, and it's like, there's GAD. There's a 12-month waiting list. Have some sertraline on your cornflakes. Yeah.
And that's the sad reality of it, isn't it? That because also even being given a diagnosis like that is anxiety inducing in itself, isn't it? So it's kind of a self-perpetuating problem. The Embody Lab is an online resource for embodied education, self-discovery and healing, founded by Dr. Scott Lyons, a renowned author and expert in holistic psychology and mind-body medicine. The Embody Lab is committed to making somatics and trauma healing accessible to everyone by offering virtual events, summits and certificates. The Embody Lab empowers individuals to embark on their own journey of personal growth and transformation through a diverse digital catalogue of programs and resources. Explore exclusive teachings from world-renowned experts like Gabor Mate, Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, Diane Paul Heller and more. Join the Embody Lab community to deepen your healing path. I'm a huge fan of the Embody Lab, and just for you, I have a special code which gives you 10% off all of their courses, and that's Helen 6788. The Embody Lab truly is a wonderful resource for your healing journey. So, yes, it's very hard to say why some of us have anxiety more than others. Talking about that stress jug again, how do you limit what's in that stress jug? How do you work with that with your clients?
The first port of call is to identify what's in it.
Okay.
A lot of people don't even know what's in it, particularly if you're an emotionally conservative person. Talk about emotional conservatism in the book, and it's when we revere the repressing and hiding of emotions, but even on a personal inwards level, where that isn't a problem, and I'm going to repress it. And that goes in your stress jug and can stay there for a long time. I'm someone who grew up in Lancashire playing rugby league, boxing, conventionally, boy things. And part of that was, you don't show weakness, you don't ever cry at school because you got punched. It's like, I'm already crying. Like, why do I need to be punched? You never show that, and that gets conditioned in your brain. And that itself was in my stress jug. Like things you introject about what it is to be a man or a woman or wherever from your own life.
I know.
Other things in my stress jug were like grief, self-esteem issues, stress, breakups, everyday stress.
And that jug's just getting fuller and fuller. And as you say, almost unconscious pressures. You're not actually aware of them, are you, in your day-to-day existence? But it's all sitting within your mind and your body the whole time.
Absolutely, yeah. When I get clients that come to me and they're like, I've no reason to be anxious. I don't understand why I'm having panic attacks. And then I get out my whiteboard and pen.
I need to get a whiteboard. I keep saying this at the moment.
I've got one on wheels. It's amazing.
I'm whiteboard jealous. I really am.
Clients are like, you're infantilizing me. I was like, damn right. Okay. But we write down their worries. Like, tell me what you're worrying about this week. Now tell me this. And as the session goes on, they're like, whoa, yeah, I've actually got quite a lot, haven't I? But they don't realize it present day, moment to moment. I certainly didn't either. Same with panic attacks. Everyone's like, panic attacks come from nowhere. And they're like, let's look at what's happened in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Interestingly, stress isn't always negative. The stress jug includes positive stress.
Go on.
So I know people who've had panic attacks and anxiety after good things. The stress of getting married, moving house, a new job, giving birth, these kind of things. And then suddenly they're struck with anxiety even though everything's going well. Positive stress goes in the stress jug as well as all the nasty stuff.
And I suppose when we're looking at positive stress, it's the impact on the nervous system, isn't it? So it's that impact on the stories the nervous system is telling, and it's a new unfamiliarity, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And
it really is a big life change.
Yeah. People with anxiety disorders struggle, I believe, because their stress jug is constantly overflowing, kicking in the sympathetic nervous system. We're constantly having the chemicals that make us feel horrible. So the adrenaline and the cortisol. You know it's cortisol when you wake up feeling doom.
Yes, talk about that, because that came up a lot, about the anxiety in the morning. So do you just want to share why?
No stranger to morning anxiety. You wake up, you open your eyes and you feel like, oh my, this is the last day the earth exists. You're this constant doom. Well, everyone gets cortisol in the morning. That's why it's what wakes us up. That's why you feel groggy and sometimes anxious. If you're susceptible to anxiety, highly stressed or struggling with anxiety disorder, you'll be susceptible to more cortisol in the morning, so you wake up probably feeling very anxious. It's very normal. It's okay. Don't encourage lying there ruminating, trying to think out your way out of that feeling. Get up. Don't let it be, don't see your problems through the lens of all that cortisol, because you're only going to be drawn to the disaster. And then throughout the day, the kind of levels drop a bit. But in the mornings, that's where we get the most of it. When we have high levels of anxiety and panic, you get a lot of cortisol and adrenaline. Yeah. If you struggle with PMDD, if you're going through the perimenopause or the menopause, you'll have even more cortisol.
That's really interesting, because I listened to something you did something on that the other day, didn't you, on your Instagram about that?
Mansplaining
You did.
The menopause.
Brilliant. But that was another question that came up that I hadn't actually brought today, but do share a little bit more about that, because that is something that's not being talked about enough, the anxiety around that comes in with perimenopause.
Yeah, people going through that, you're going to go through a rough time. I don't envy it, and you've got to go through it quite a lot. But like during times, if you struggle with PMDD and perimenopause and menopause, your estrogen drops during your cycle, and what's the other chemical now? Estrogen and progesterone, that's the one. When they plummet, the body compensates by, we'll have some cortisol. And it's like, but if you're already anxious, it's like, I've had enough. Yeah. And so if you get anxious, particularly around if it's that time of the month, or you're going through perimenopause or menopause, you're not doing anything wrong. You're going to get the symptoms that go with that. The hot flushes, the heart palpitations, the lack of sleep, that doom feeling, the sweating, the nausea, things like that. And because the body doing what it's doing, it doesn't make you any weaker or less able. And I admire you for going through it.
I think it's. I think you started to bring in some of the symptoms there of anxiety in general as well, which are obviously impacted a lot in perimenopause. But lots of people ask the questions around what symptoms are we seeing in anxiety? What symptoms are you seeing the most of? What are the unusual symptoms?
There's a lot of symptoms. I'll try and reel them off.
Yeah.
From the most common, one of the most common ones I hear is that dissociation, or DPDR, which is when we don't feel like our usual selves, when we feel detached from who we are.
It's a very popular one, isn't it? And that can be a really frightening symptom for people who don't realise it's linked to anxiety.
Yeah, it's definitely. I call it a stress symptom. I still get it now, but I'm not bothered by it. Didn't know what it was. Oh, it was frightening.
Yes.
I was like, I felt like I was in the Matrix, and I didn't understand I just didn't feel like I was in my body. And then I got in the cycle, so then I worried about it.
Yeah.
But it was the stress that was keeping it there. So I'm just in this cycle of worrying about it. No one explained to me what it was. And then it just maintained itself. So I was like, oh, I've broken my brain finally. But actually, I was just in a dissociative state because I was in the anxious cycle.
Of course you were.
Yeah, that's one. Heart palpitations, skipped heartbeats. That's a popular one. And if you're anxious, your posture's probably poor, so you'll get chest pains.
Yes, of course.
If you have heart palpitations and chest pains, that's fun because you misinterpret what's going on. Two completely separate symptoms, but your brain just goes, chest pain, heart palpitating, I'm off. Yeah.
And you can then see how quickly that fear response escalates and all the other symptoms come in. The other one is, and you mentioned earlier, intrusive thoughts.
Oh, yes, intrusive thoughts.
And again, all of this is information that's accessible for people to learn how to handle anxiety. But people don't always know where to look or how to get the resources or the support, or to even normalise intrusive thoughts.
I love normalising intrusive thoughts. Someone who's got OCD as well, but they're so common. Everyone gets intrusive thoughts, but for some people, I'm going to go back to the amygdala again and the threat response. For some people, the amygdala decides that intrusive thought has become a threat, and therefore that thought becomes important. Mean nothing, everyone gets them, but because the threat response has hijacked your brain, it's like, what does that mean about me?
Yeah. Personalise it, don't you?
Yeah, really common. Everyone gets them, but if you're particularly stressed, susceptible to OCD and intrusive thoughts, going through a time where your body is in a chemical imbalance, they'll feel more real. It doesn't mean they are. And my piece of advice for anyone struggling with intrusive thoughts is that they thrive because they're the opposite of who you are. You never get an intrusive thought that's something that you actually want to do. I love talking about, I specialize in OCD, so it's, and you might get really horrible and inappropriate thoughts, so taboo, couldn't name them out loud, but if you're one of these people, it's usually OCD and it's thriving and eating you up because it's the opposite of who you are.
That's such a helpful piece of advice. And you actually mentioned something quite similar to that in your book with one of your characters. I'm trying to think, I can't remember the name of him now.
Yeah, Levi the bouncer. Yeah.
And he needed that advice at that moment, didn't he? And I could feel his relief. I could feel his body calm just by you mentioning those words.
My book, Choose You, is out now and offers you some ways to understand yourself at a deeper level as well as guiding you through ways to befriend your nervous system so that you can feel in control with the stress responses that your body may experience, as opposed to them controlling you. Choose You, out now.
One of my favourite kind of client case studies in the book, a guy called Levi is a head bouncer at a nightclub, wonderful person with his own rocky life, rocky past.
Yes.
It just comes to me. He doesn't understand what OCD and intrusive thoughts are. He misinterprets it as his brain's possessed by a demon, and he has inappropriate thoughts about members of his family. He thinks he's a bad person for it, and so does horrible compulsions to try and rid himself of it. And in the book, I talk about how I work with OCD and teaching him actually, no, this is what's happening with the brain. And as well as other things, he brings other things to the therapy room, but that's one of them. And
they're not knocking. When it used to walk into the therapy room.
takes live to never knock. One of my favorite clients, so rude, so I really like it, and I'm terrified as a therapist because he's massive and scary, but what a beautiful therapeutic story that is.
Oh, it's beautiful. But the way he walked in didn't you spill your coffee or tomato soup? Something went all over you.
Once was tomato soup, and then it was yogurt and something else, tea. Yeah, keeps making me jump as he walks in.
It was a lovely, lovely interaction and so helpful. I think one of the questions that I think would be worth exploring now is your tips that you use. I almost don't like using the word tips when you're a therapist because it's so much more than that. But what tools could you advise now or offer now for anyone who's sat listening with anxiety?
Of course I can. I often get asked, with top tips and things like that. And in social media, it's full of a lot of, here's 5 biohacks. Yes. If you want to get me annoyed, talk about biohacking. Can I factor in my choose you as well into the answer? Because this is what I was saving it for.
I really think it would be useful to just methods, tools to use for people who are struggling.
If you struggle with anxiety, panic attacks, fear of fear itself, intrusive thoughts, uncertainty in your life that you struggle with, maybe ruminate on and it's consuming, my favorite coping technique is actually, it's going to sound cheesy, but you are the coping technique. Don't do what I did to find all the answers externally, because they never get the credit for tolerating uncertainty. I tried everything to make the uncertainty go away because I didn't believe that I was strong and capable enough. If you have a panic attack, you don't need anything. It's not hurting you. You are the coping technique. If you start grabbing people and getting outside help and all that, you're just teaching the brain that you can't cope. You need these things. What I like to do is teach people you can tolerate anxiety. And the way out is something that I always bang on about, is the willful tolerance of anxiety. So take it with you. Go into the loud restaurant and let it be loud. It doesn't matter. And the more you do it, the more you teach the brain over time that anxiety isn't important. There's some amazing brain rewiring. The amygdala calms down and stops firing off in Asda when you're trying to, buy your beans and bread. You are the coping technique. I'm not going to tell you to sit and tap. I'm not going to tell you to go and get ice cubes. I'm not going to tell you to say these mantras. And all I'll say is remind yourself that you are the coping technique, and you will get the credit for tolerating that uncertainty, no matter how loud the thoughts are.
That's incredible. So it is that willingness to sit with the uncomfortable, isn't it?
Yeah. People in my practice and climbing the walls. I'm having a panic attack. What do? I'm like, nothing. Shall I do deep breathing? No. What's that going to do? The adrenaline's already in your system. I'm not going to IV it out of you. Let's just let it pass. The body can only produce a finite amount of adrenaline and cortisol as well. So some people are...
That's important. That's really important to mention. I'll let you carry on with that.
Yeah, the body can only produce a finite amount of adrenaline and cortisol. So whilst you're having intense anxiety, it has to end, And then I get anxious clients like, but what if mine doesn't? It's like, well, it has to end. All feelings are transient, whether it's anxiety, sadness, happiness, elation, the good ones, the nasty ones, the neutral ones. They're all transient, including the scary ones. So even at the scariest moments in your life, no matter where you are, it will pass. Now, you can run away from that moment. Don't get me wrong, if it's actually a dangerous moment, run. If you know the situation's safe and you know that this is an internal anxiety problem, don't run. Don't avoid. Practice a little bit at a time. I love exposure therapy for that, because you teach the brain, this is safe, and I'm going to show you it's safe, despite feeling absolutely terrified. And the anxiety will go up, and then it will start to come down, and the amygdala rewires itself. It's wonderful.
And it's in that moment of the coming down, isn't it? It's that you're then teaching you that it does pass. You do get through it.
Absolutely, yeah. If you take a dog phobia, I always use the dog phobia analogy. If you're bitten by a dog as a kid, your brain's going to, warn you about dogs. There's a dog over the road. The dog next door is barking. You're going to be hypersensitive of a dog barking a mile away. A dog comes on TV. You're terrified, because the brain's trying to protect you. Dogs equal danger. But using the principles of exposure therapy, you start small. Start looking at pictures of the dog without avoiding, without compulsively using avoidance behaviors. And you allow yourself to feel it until the brain rewires and goes, all right, okay, I'm all right with pictures of dogs now. Right, I'll listen to the dog outside the window. Okay, I don't like it, but I'll sit here, let myself feel it, and then the anxiety will come down and the brain rewires itself. And you build up all the way. Yeah. Maybe pet a small dog, maybe, sit and ride a Doberman into the sunset eventually. And then you can rewire the brain to not fear dogs again. Will you and I be doing that with spiders? No. Absolutely.
I literally sat there thinking, I will mention spiders. I don't think I could do it. And I know it would work. But you're absolutely right. We can rewire the brain. Yeah. And you show that all the way through your book, Josh. And there's lots of exposure therapy examples. The lift, the driving. It's there. And it's that allowing people to feel they can trust themselves again. And that comes full circle back to what you were saying, is about trusting yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
Choosing you.
Yeah, absolutely. Choosing you.
You can get through it.
Yeah. It's you. It's you that's doing it. You have to get the credit.
Yes.
And you are getting the credit. And if you're anxious and listening to this now, you have tolerated all anxiety, all adversity, in every moment of your life up until this moment. If you're someone who's very self-critical, like, oh, I'm anxious, not doing stuff, no, the evidence suggests that you've tolerated absolutely everything and you're doing all right, and I'd say go easy on yourself.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And just even hearing those words, people get that wave of something feels safer inside. Josh, I know that you have, a part of, as well as this book, there's another couple of books you've got out that are specific to anxiety, aren't there?
Yeah. So, and how does that make you feel? You feel like a laugh. That's a stealth help book. So you're reading it, you're laughing, you're being nosy about my life. Some mad stuff in there about my life.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's for everyone to read. If you struggle with panic attacks and really in the midst of anxiety, I recommend my actual self-help books, which aren't funny, really. They're just nice, accessible, easy to digest anxiety books for people from the perspective of someone who's been through it and now a therapist.
I'll link those books at the end of this podcast.
Thank you.
But Josh, thank you so much. I can't believe how quickly this conversation has gone. I thought we had ages left. So thank you. It's been really lovely to meet you and a great conversation.
Thank you for having me on. It's so nice. You're a lovely host as well. You're a very calming manner. It's nice. It's the therapist in you, isn't it?